All right, we're going to finish up histology by talking about connective tissue and then epithelial tissue. So connective tissue is going to be the most abundant, widespread tissue that we have. It's going to bind stuff. It's going to connect things. That's kind of where it gets its name, right? It's also important in supporting. It also protects you, fills up spaces, stores fat, produces blood cells. Your connective tissue does a lot of stuff. And you're really going to find it throughout the body. Just about any organ you have is going to have one type or more of connective tissues. Something that is specific to connective tissues is that they have this extracellular matrix. We talked about that a little bit last time, how the extra means outside, right? Like an extraterrestrial is an alien, something that is outside of Terra or Earth. This extracellular matrix is something that is outside of the cell. And your connective tissue has a lot of this extracellular matrix. And it's made up of a ground substance and fibers. And it's really this ground substance that gives us our different classifications of connective tissue. So we can classify connective tissue into 4 different groups. You have your connective proper, which kind of has this soft gel-like ground substance. And then you have your cartilage, which is a much tougher, stronger ground substance. And then you have bone, which is almost a solid ground substance. And then blood, which has a liquid ground substance. And we'll go through all these a little bit more in detail when we touch on each of them. The types of cells that you find in connective tissue, probably the most common one is going to be fibroblast. These are the cells that make those specific fibers. And it's the concentration and types of fibers that gives us the differences within our 4 categories of connective tissue. So in your connective property, you have stuff like adipose, areolar, dense connective, and it's talking about how those fibers interact with each other and the types of fibers you have that are the differences in those groups, because the ground substance is basically the same. Then we have our macrophages. If you remember, the white blood cells are held pretty low in concentration in the blood because most of them are going to be in your other connective tissues. And macrophages, these are going to be those cells that are derived from monocytes. And so when those monocytes do that diapedesis, when they crawl out of the blood vessel, they then become a macrophage that is going to be specific for the tissue that it's in. And macrophage, macro means big, phage means eat. And so your macrophages are cells that are big eaters. What do they eat? Well, they eat pathogens, stuff like bacteria. They also eat other cells that need to be disposed of or broken down, any type of debris out there. Your macrophages can eat this. And we have mast cells. These are going to be found near blood vessels, and they can release heparin and histamine. So that sounds a lot like a basophil, and it is. The mast cell is going to be basically a basophil, kind of like the macrophage is a monocyte, right? When it gets out into these different connective tissues, it is now called a mast cell and not a basophil, but it is derived from that same cell. All right, so the different types of connective tissue, of course, they are all based on that ground substance, your connective proper, cartilaginous, bone, blood. And then the differences within those categories are based on that fiber and cell types. The different types of fibers we have collagenous fibers. If you look right here, these thick fibers are collagenous fibers. They're super strong. They're really common. You find them really in a lot of your tendons and ligaments. So the difference between a tendon and a ligament is just where it comes from. So you have muscle tendons. They go from the muscle to the bone. And then you have ligaments, which are going to be bone-to-bone attachments. No one calls them muscle ligaments. They're muscle tendons, and then you have ligaments like your ACL, MCL, that kind of stuff. So those have a lot of collagen fibers, or these collagenous fibers. The next group are reticular fibers. These are really thin collagenous fibers. You're going to see them right here. They look kind of spread out, almost like a spider web. Reticular means branched and broken. And so if you're looking at this, you can see that it has lots of branching going on in there. And so they can resist force from a bunch of different directions. And reticular fibers you're going to find pretty concentrated in your lymphoid tissue. So stuff that is associated with the lymphatic system, with your immune system. And then we have our elastic fibers down here. Elastic is very thin and very stretchy. It's very elastic. And so here you can see all these little thin elastic fibers. So coming over to connective proper, the ones we're going to talk about are areolar, adipose, reticular, and then our two types of dense connective tissue. The first one is our areolar. This is kind of like the packing peanuts of the body. Any place where you need space filled, you're going to find this areolar tissue. It's good at cushioning shocks, and so it's pretty absorbent. If you look, you can see a lot of those collagen fibers. You also have quite a few elastic fibers, these really thin ones in here. You can tell these are elastic and not reticular because these are not highly branched. And then this, you can see this would be an adipocyte or a fat cell. Here you can see a mast cell thrown in here. Your collagen fibers, all these nuclei are going to be your fibroblast. So they're the ones that are making the fibers that you see, both the collagenous and elastic. And then here you can see a macrophage. Another macrophage right there. So your areolar, you're going to find it separating the skin from the deeper tissues. So near the end of the dermis, before you get to the hypodermis, you can find some areolar. The next one is adipose. This is your fat tissue. The cells that store the fats, or the triglycerides, are called adipocytes or adipocytes. And you're going to find them not everywhere. A lot of times when I ask people, where do you find fat? They're like, everywhere. Not everywhere. It's actually stored in really distinct places. Beneath the skin, so in the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis, you're going to find adipose. You're also going to find it in the abdominal membranes, like the greater omentum, around the kidneys, around the heart, around the joints. You can also find them in the yellow marrow of bone. That's about it. You don't have fat everywhere. Very, very special places to have it. And what it does is it cushions the joints and the organs. That's why you find them around the kidneys and the heart and the joints, to help protect it. You find it beneath the skin because it helps to insulate the body, and then in the abdominal membranes because it's storing energy. Fat is a great way to store energy. It can store a lot of energy without weighing a lot, compared to starches. Or another way to store energy are these starches, which are really long chains of glucose that weigh a lot for the amount of energy that they are able to give off, while fat can store a lot of energy without giving a lot of weight. So when you look at a slide of adipose, you can see right here, it kind of looks like air pockets. But those aren't air pockets. These are fat pockets. So these adipocytes make these big old fat droplets, or droplets of triglycerides, and store them in the cell. You can see maybe there's a nucleus right there, a little bit of cytoplasm, and then cell membrane. So they are just chocked full of these triglycerides. These will be blood vessels that are running through here, because if you need to release that energy, you have to release it into the blood so it can get to where it's going. The next one is reticular or reticuloendothelial tissue. I'll refer to it as reticular. This one has a lot of phagocytic cells. You'll find a lot of white blood cells associated with your reticular tissue, because you're going to find it in the lymphatic system mostly. So stuff like the spleen and your lymph nodes are where you're going to find reticular tissue. And so here you can see those branched fibers, these reticular fibers here branching out, kind of looking like black little lightning bolts. That's how you know you're looking at reticular. All these dark cells in here, these are all white blood cells. These are lymphocytes. And then some of the bigger ones would be like your monocytes. And then onto your dense fibrous connective tissue. Lots and lots of collagen fibers in these. They're very strong. Your dense regular is going to be forming your ligaments and tendons. They are able to take a lot of compression strength or tensile strength. They can pull or take a lot of energy in one direction. Whereas you'll find your dense irregular, this type, like in the sclera or the white portion of the eyes, and also in the dermis. So you can see there's a bunch of collagen fibers running different directions. And if you remember when we talked about muscle, like dense regular is pretty hard to tell apart from smooth muscle, except each one of these cells does not have a nucleus, or the nuclei in this are really far spaced out, versus in smooth muscle where each individual cell is tightly packed and each one has a nucleus. So here we're looking at your dense regular as a drawing and all these collagen fibers. Here you can see the fibroblast interspaced in here, versus your dense irregular. Here you can see one long collagen fiber, but a lot of these are cut in half. I love this picture. It really shows how those collagen fibers go a bunch of different directions, which allows this tissue type to handle being stretched in a bunch of different directions. So if you think about your skin, it can stretch in a bunch of different directions and not rip and tear. And that's it for your connective proper. The next group of your connective tissue is your cartilage. Why do I have a picture of this? This is a basking shark. The group of sharks are called chondrichthyes. Chondro is the word for cartilage, and sharks belong to the cartilaginous fish. Chondro, chondrichthyes, ichthyes means fish. We're talking about cartilage, chondro, site. So cartilage cells make up your cartilage. Cartilage is avascular. Most of your connective tissue has a really good blood supply, but cartilage does not. Instead, it is packed full of these fibers to give it strength. Cartilage can be rigid or it can be flexible. We'll talk about the 3 different types in a little bit. Often enclosed in a perichondrium, kind of like your periosteum, if you remember talking about that when we talked about bones, is we have that covering on the outside of bones. Cartilage, we have a covering outside of the cartilage called a perichondrium. It's important for the attachment, growth, and maintenance of your cartilage. So what do we use cartilage for? Well, kind of like these sharks. One thing is it provides support and protection. It's the framework and attachments for your bones, for your long bones. You have this stuff called endochondral ossification. So the growth of bones is based on this hyaline cartilage framework, and then the bone comes and replaces it. So the first one we're going to talk about is hyaline. It's one of my favorite tissues. It's so pretty. When you're looking at hyaline, you can see these little bubbles around, and then right here you can see the cell. And so the cells in cartilage are going to be in these things called lacunae. If we go down to the next slide. So here's a lacunae, and then your chondrocytes are inside of that. And the lacunae act a lot like the lacunae that we saw in bones. And so they're like these little lagoons that help to protect that cell from getting squished out from the cartilage. When we talk about hyaline cartilage, you're going to find it in a bunch of different places. It's really common at the ends of all your long bones. It's pretty tough, but also kind of flexible. So you can push on your sternum, and where these ribs meet up with the sternum, you have that costal cartilage attachment. That attachment is hyaline cartilage. You have it in your trachea. If you feel down your trachea, you can feel these little bumps. Those bumps are made of hyaline cartilage. And it is the hyaline cartilage that is used in bone development. So looking at it again, the ground substance in this looks very smooth. It's not like the others where you see the fibers going all over the place. It is chock full of collagen fibers, so much that it looks like a smooth sheet. And then you can see the lacunae in your chondrocytes inside of that. The next one is elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage is going to be really elastic. It has a lot of elastic fibers, so it is going to be very stretchy, flexible, bendy. If you look again, it's a cartilage. All your cartilage, you're going to find chondrocytes in lacunae, okay? So if you see lacunae anywhere, you're thinking that's probably going to be a cartilage or it's bone. And we know what bone looks like, so hopefully you can tell those two apart. This is elastic tissue, so you can see those elastic fibers, those really thin fibers that aren't branched a lot. Places where you find elastic cartilage, you're going to find it on the outer ear. You can bend your ear and it flops right back because you have elastic cartilage. You can find it on the epiglottis. The epiglottis is a little flap right above your larynx. And so when you swallow, this flap closes so spit doesn't go down your trachea, and so you don't choke on your own spit or whatever you're swallowing, food, water, whatever. And you also find elastic at the tip of the nose. So if you put your finger on your nose, you can wiggle it, and it's pretty wiggly. If you go up a little bit higher, though, you can feel it wiggle some, but it's also kind of hard. That's because that's hyaline cartilage right there. So wiggly, not super wiggly because of hyaline cartilage. And then if you go up higher to the bridge of the nose up here, that doesn't wiggle because that's bone. Those are your nasal bones. The last cartilage is fibrocartilage. This stuff is super, super tough, really durable, great at compression. You can't really squish it. So you're going to find it absorbing a lot of shock. You're going to find it in the areas that take a lot of compression. So you're going to find it in your intervertebral disc, the disc between the vertebrae. So you got two vertebrae here and this little squishy disc that stop them from hitting. You're also going to find it in the pubic symphysis. So where those two pubic bones come together, they're held together by fibrocartilage, which is pretty crazy thinking that it's going to be holding up most of your weight. If those slip, well, then you're not going to be able to walk anymore. Your hip just broke, right? And then you also find it in the knee joint because that takes a lot of compression. When you look at fibrocartilage, you're going to see it kind of looks like dense regular, except we have lacunae and chondrocytes in there. So our three types of cartilage: hyaline, elastic, fibro. Moving on to bone, it's going to be the most rigid of our connective tissue. It's made up of some collagen, but mostly these calcium salts. It's a very special type of calcium salt. It has some magnesium in it, and it's called hydroxyapatite. Makes up the majority of your bone. It's made by osteoblasts destroyed by osteoclasts and maintained by osteocytes. You have your central canal, and then those lamellae that go around here. You can see the lacunae in here, and those little bitty canals, the caniculi, that connect them to each other. Again, bone is surrounded by that periosteum right here. Helps to make the tendons, where you can see the tendons pulling on the bone. It's very vascular. It's very active tissue. Sometimes it's a lot better to break a bone than it is to get a bad sprain, because those sprains, we're talking about injuring tendons and ligaments, those don't have a lot of blood supply. And so it takes a lot longer to heal a bad sprain than it does a broken bone. Bones heal 4 to 6 weeks. A bad sprain can take 3-4 months to fully heal. So, your bone tissue, we've already talked about the skeletal system, so this is just kind of like a review. It helps to support the body, houses the marrow, protects your vital organs, store inorganic chemicals like calcium and magnesium. You can see all of the stuff. And blood, we just finished talking about blood, so this should also be like a review to you. What does it do? Well, it transports. It maintains a stable internal environment, so it acts as a buffer. It regulates. Includes all these little red blood cells, your white blood cells, platelets, and it's all suspended in that liquid ground substance called plasma. And next is epithelial cells. I'll just stop here and then start a new one with epithelial cells.